The notification appeared on Yasmin Cruz's phone at 3:47 a.m. on January 8, 2023. Your OnlyFans account has been accessed from a new device in Dubai, UAE. The 28-year-old Filipina influencer, known to her 340,000 Instagram followers as @YasminLuxLife, initially dismissed it as a technical glitch or perhaps an overzealous fan who had somehow compromised her security. But within 2 hours, her carefully curated double life would explode across social media in the most devastating way possible. By 6 a.m., screenshots from her private OnlyFans account were circulating on Twitter, WhatsApp groups, and Filipino gossip forums. But these weren't the typical subscriber leaks that occasionally plague content creators. These were messages, explicit conversations between Yasmin and Sheikh Tariq Al Maktoum, a 45-year-old Dubai real estate developer whose family's construction empire had built half of Business Bay. Messages that revealed not just a sexual relationship, but financial arrangements, expensive gifts, and most damningly, voice notes where Yasmin laughed about the Sheikh's wife while counting cash she had received for private content that went far beyond anything posted on her public platforms. The person who had hacked the account and released this nuclear-level scandal wasn't a random hacker or jealous competitor. It was Sheikh Laila Al Maktoum, 38 years old, Stanford-educated, and far more technologically sophisticated than her husband had ever bothered to discover. She had spent 6 months methodically tracking her husband's affair, gathering evidence, and planning a revenge that would destroy both her husband's mistress and his reputation with surgical precision that made Sofia Reyes's HIV revenge look impulsive by comparison. But Sheikh Laila's exposure of the affair didn't just humiliate Yasmin and Tariq. It triggered a cascade of consequences that would leave one person dead, multiple people imprisoned, and expose the hidden economy where Filipina influencers monetize relationships with wealthy Gulf men through platforms that exist in legal gray areas between sex work, content creation, and sugar baby arrangements that everyone knows exist but nobody officially acknowledges. Stay with us because this isn't just about an affair exposed by a scorned wife. This is about the collision between Instagram perfection and OnlyFans reality, between traditional marriage and modern transactional relationships, and between a Filipina influencer who thought she was building a brand and a Sheikh's wife who understood that information warfare is the ultimate weapon when divorce courts favor men and social media can destroy reputations faster than any legal proceeding. The question isn't just how Sheikh Laila hacked the account. It's what happened after the exposure when Yasmin's carefully constructed influencer life collapsed, when death threats started arriving, and when she made the fatal decision to blackmail the Sheikh with content she had kept as insurance but that would ultimately get her killed. Yasmin Marie Cruz was born on August 15, 1994, in Quezon City, Metro Manila, the densely populated urban sprawl where millions of Filipinos live in the gap between poverty and middle class, earning enough to avoid absolute destitution but never enough to achieve the security that allows people to stop worrying about money. Her family lived in a modest townhouse in Project 6, a neighborhood of concrete homes pressed together like books on an overfilled shelf, where every square meter of space was occupied in privacy was a luxury no one could afford. Her father, Ramon, worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm, earning approximately 35,000 pesos monthly, roughly $700. Enough for rent, food, and basic expenses, but not enough for the private school tuition, international travel, or material comforts that define success in a culture obsessed with keeping up appearances. Her mother, Teresa, had stopped working after Yasmin's birth, dedicating herself to raising Yasmin and her younger brother Carlos while running a small online business selling imported cosmetics that generated modest supplemental income. Yasmin was beautiful in ways that were commercially valuable, fine features that photographed well, a naturally slim figure that looked elegant in clothes, and most importantly, the ability to project confidence and sophistication regardless of what she actually felt. By 14, she was already attracting attention on early social media platforms, posting selfies that generated hundreds of likes and comments that taught her that her appearance had monetary value if properly leveraged. Her education was adequate but unremarkable. She attended public school through high school, earning grades good enough for state university admission but not competitive enough for scholarships to prestigious private institutions. She enrolled at the University of the Philippines Diliman in 2012, initially studying business administration with vague plans of working in marketing or corporate communications, careers that seemed sophisticated and well-paid compared to her parents' modest middle-class struggle. But university life revealed the vast economic stratification within Filipino society. Yasmin's classmates included wealthy students who drove cars to campus, wore designer clothes, traveled internationally during breaks, and treated money with casualness that revealed they had never experienced financial anxiety. Yasmin's own circumstances, commuting via jeepney, carefully budgeting for photocopies and textbooks, bringing packed lunches because campus food was expensive, marked her as someone from the struggling middle class rather than the elite who actually controlled Philippine society and economy. The gap between her circumstances and her aspirations created the psychological conditions for what would eventually become her downfall. Yasmin didn't just want to be comfortable. She wanted the lifestyle her wealthy classmates took for granted, the international travel, the designer purchases, the ability to make choices based on preference rather than budget constraints. But traditional career paths would never provide that lifestyle quickly enough to satisfy her impatience and ambition. Her entry into influencer culture began in 2014 during her third year of university, when Instagram was transitioning from photo-sharing app to powerful marketing platform. Yasmin created an account, initially just posting outfit photos, cafe visits, and the carefully curated moments that made her life seem more glamorous than it actually was. Her following grew slowly at first, but by 2015 she had accumulated approximately 15,000 followers, enough to start receiving free products from local brands seeking promotion. The economics of influencer marketing revealed themselves quickly. Companies would provide free clothing, accessories, cosmetics, or dining experiences in exchange for posts that looked spontaneous but were actually carefully negotiated marketing arrangements. Yasmin discovered she could monetize her appearance and her ability to make products look desirable to followers who wanted to emulate her seemingly perfect life. By 2016, having abandoned university to focus on social media full-time, a decision that horrified her traditional parents, Yasmin was earning approximately 40,000 to 60,000 pesos monthly, roughly $800 to $1,200 USD, through a combination of sponsored posts, affiliate marketing, and appearance fees at events where brands paid her to attend and post content. It was more than her father earned as an accountant, achieved through work that consisted largely of taking photographs and maintaining her online persona. But the lifestyle she was promoting, luxury travel, designer purchases, five-star dining, cost far more than she was actually earning. The industry's dirty secret was that many influencers were essentially broke, borrowing clothes for photo shoots, using credit to finance appearances of wealth, and staying in luxury hotels for just the one night needed to produce content before returning to far more modest accommodations. Yasmin's Instagram feed showed a life of constant glamour. Her bank account told a different story of debt accumulation and financial anxiety. The solution presented itself in 2018 when another Filipina influencer told Yasmin about the arrangement economy that existed in Dubai, Singapore, and other wealthy Asian cities. Wealthy men, particularly Middle Eastern businessmen and Asian tycoons, were willing to pay substantial amounts for the company of beautiful women who understood that these arrangements were transactional rather than romantic. The women provided companionship, content for their social media that made the men seem desirable and successful, and private intimacy that was never explicitly discussed but was clearly expected. In exchange, they received cash payments, expensive gifts, travel opportunities, and most importantly, the genuine lifestyle content that made their influencer personas believable. In March 2019, Yasmin received a DM from an account claiming to represent a Dubai-based business group seeking influencer partnerships for Middle East market promotion. The offer was to visit Dubai for 2 weeks, with all expenses paid, to create content showcasing Dubai's luxury lifestyle. The compensation was $10,000 plus expenses, far more than any legitimate sponsorship Yasmin had ever received. She accepted despite recognizing that the offer likely involved expectations beyond simple content creation. At 25 years old, Yasmin had rationalized that her body was an asset like her face or her social media following, something that could be monetized if she was smart and careful about how she managed the transactions. She told her parents she was going to Dubai for a paid influencer campaign, which was technically true even if it omitted the full scope of what that campaign would actually entail. That first Dubai trip in April 2019 introduced Yasmin to the world she would eventually inhabit for 4 years. A world where Filipina influencers served as social media girlfriends for wealthy Gulf men who wanted the appearance of dating beautiful women without the complications of actual relationships. The arrangements were surprisingly professional. Negotiated rates for different levels of companionship, clear boundaries, at least initially, non-disclosure expectations, and payment structures that made the transactions feel like business deals rather than prostitution. Yasmin met Sheikh Tariq Al Maktoum during that first trip, introduced by the same business group that had recruited her. Tariq was everything she had been conditioned to value. Wealthy, generous, worldly, and genuinely charming in ways that made the transactional nature of their arrangement feel less degrading. He didn't treat her like a prostitute. He treated her like a valued companion whose company he was privileged to purchase, a distinction that mattered psychologically even if it was functionally identical. Their arrangement began simply. Yasmin would visit Dubai for 7 to 10 days every few months, stay in an apartment Tariq rented for such purposes, accompany him to business dinners and social events where having a beautiful young woman enhanced his status, and provide private companionship that everyone understood meant sexual intimacy, though it was never explicitly stated in those terms. In exchange, she received $5,000 to $8,000 per visit plus shopping allowances, gifts of jewelry and electronics, and most valuable, the genuine luxury lifestyle content that made her Instagram account, @YasminLuxLife, launched in 2019 to separate her luxury lifestyle persona from her earlier account, explode in popularity. By 2020, Yasmin had 150,000 Instagram followers who believed she was a successful influencer whose brand partnerships and content creation income funded her glamorous lifestyle. What they didn't know was that her income came primarily from her arrangement with Tariq and increasingly from an OnlyFans account where she monetized access to more explicit content and private messaging with subscribers willing to pay $50 monthly plus tips for custom content. The OnlyFans account, launched in August 2020, was initially separate from her arrangement with Tariq. It was simply another revenue stream that allowed her to monetize the sexuality she was already performing in private. But by late 2020, she had begun creating custom content specifically for Tariq, charging him thousands of dollars for videos and photographs that were far more explicit than anything available to regular subscribers. This custom content became both her most lucrative income source and ultimately the evidence that would destroy her when Sheikh Laila hacked the account and discovered not just the affair but the financial transactions that revealed its true nature. Messages like, "Received your $3,000 transfer, baby. Your custom video will be ready tomorrow, face blowing a kiss." And voice notes where Yasmin laughed about charging your wife's credit card for content showing me fuck you, would become the damning evidence that transformed a simple affair into a public humiliation that neither Yasmin nor Tariq would survive intact. Sheikh Tariq bin Mohammed Al Maktoum was born in 1978 into Dubai's sprawling Al Maktoum family. Not close enough to the ruling branch to have political power but wealthy enough through inherited landholdings and smart investments to live with the opulence that characterized Dubai's elite class. His childhood had been defined by privilege without responsibility, wealth without the pressure to actually earn it, and the kind of entitlement that comes from never experiencing consequences for bad behavior. His education followed the standard trajectory of Gulf elite. Expensive international schools in Dubai, undergraduate degree from Boston University where he majored in business and minored in partying, and an MBA from INSEAD in France that his family's donations secured despite his mediocre academic performance. He returned to Dubai in 2004 and took nominal positions in the family's real estate and construction businesses, approving decisions made by more competent employees while collecting income that had nothing to do with his actual contributions. By 2023, at 45, Tariq's wealth was estimated at approximately $80 million. Substantial but not extraordinary by Dubai standards, enough for luxury but not enough for the kind of limitless spending that characterized billionaire families. His portfolio included partial ownership in several business bay towers, investments in Dubai marina developments, and construction contracts secured through family connections rather than competitive bidding. His marriage to Laila in 2005 had been partially arranged, joining two prominent families in a union that consolidated business interests and social status. Laila was intelligent, educated, and came from a family whose wealth and connections matched the Al Maktoums. Her father had been a government minister. Her mother descended from Abu Dhabi's royal family. The marriage produced 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, and maintained the appearance of stability that was important for both families' reputations. But Tariq's sense of entitlement extended beyond wealth to include viewing women as acquisitions rather than partners. His marriage to Laila had been based on social compatibility rather than romantic love or sexual attraction, and he had never seriously committed to fidelity despite the marriage vows. His affairs were numerous and followed predictable patterns. Identify beautiful women in vulnerable positions, provide financial support that created dependency, maintain relationships until they became inconvenient or boring, then move to the next conquest while providing severance payments that ensured discretion. Previous mistresses had included a Ukrainian model, a Lebanese television host, an Indian Bollywood actress between projects, and at least 3 other Filipino women who occupied various points on the spectrum between girlfriend and escort. Tariq preferred these arrangements to the complications of emotional relationships. He could schedule companionship when convenient, avoid the messy emotional demands of actual intimacy, and maintain his marriage while satisfying desires that Laila had long ago stopped accommodating. His interest in influencers was partly about status and partly about documentation. Tariq enjoyed the ego validation of dating women whose beauty was publicly acknowledged through social media metrics. Hundreds of thousands of followers who confirmed that yes, this woman was objectively desirable and he had successfully acquired access to her. He also enjoyed the content these women created, the photographs and videos that showed him living the life that Dubai's marketing materials promised. Beautiful companions, luxury locations, perfect moments captured and shared with audiences who envied his seemingly perfect existence. Yasmin had appealed to Tariq immediately when they met in April 2019 because she represented the perfect combination of beauty, social media savvy, and financial desperation that made her willing to accept arrangements that more secure women would reject. Her Instagram aesthetic, luxury lifestyle, designer fashion, exotic travel, aligned with how he wanted to be perceived. Her youth and beauty made him feel virile and successful. And most importantly, her clear understanding that their relationship was transactional rather than romantic eliminated the emotional complications that he found tedious. Their arrangement from 2019 to 2022 had been remarkably stable by the standards of such relationships. Yasmin visited Dubai regularly, provided the companionship and content he wanted, never made demands about their relationship becoming more serious or public, and maintained discretion that protected both of their reputations. Tariq believed he had found the ideal situation. Regular access to a beautiful woman who enhanced his social status, genuine affection, or at least convincing performance of it, and none of the obligations or complications that came with traditional relationships. But Tariq had made several fatal miscalculations. First, he had underestimated his wife's intelligence and technological sophistication. He assumed Laila was focused on social obligations and children rather than monitoring his activities. Second, he had failed to recognize that his financial transactions left digital trails that someone with access and motivation could follow. And most critically, he had failed to understand that OnlyFans accounts, while private, were not impenetrable, and that Yasmin's decision to create custom content specifically for him created permanent documentation of an affair he believed existed only in private moments. His pattern of taking screenshots and recordings of Yasmin's custom OnlyFans content, ostensibly for his private collection, had created an archive that would become evidence when Laila eventually accessed the account. Messages where he requested specific acts, paid for custom videos, and shared details about his marriage and family life would all become public when Laila executed her revenge with the precision that comes from months of planning and intimate knowledge of her target's vulnerabilities. Tariq's final miscalculation was assuming that Yasmin would accept quiet exposure and fade away to the Philippines with whatever severance payment he offered. He didn't anticipate that she would attempt blackmail using content she had deliberately saved, or that his response to that blackmail would set in motion events that would end with Yasmin's death and his own arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, a charge that would transform his privileged existence into a nightmare from which his wealth couldn't rescue him. Sheikh Laila bint Abdullah Al Maktoum was born in 1985 into the kind of privilege that came with expectations and limitations. Her family was prominent. Her father had served as Minister of Economy, her mother connected to Abu Dhabi's ruling family. But she was female in a culture that valued women's virtue, discretion, and social grace more than their intelligence or ambitions. Her education had been exceptional. American School of Dubai followed by Stanford University, where she earned degrees in computer science and business, graduating in 2007 with skills that were impressive, but that her culture viewed as less important than her primary role as wife and mother. Her marriage to Tariq in 2005, before she completed university, her education continued after marriage at her insistence, had been acceptable to her initially because she believed he was genuinely committed to building a partnership. The early years had been tolerable if not fulfilling. They had 3 children by 2012, maintained appropriate social appearances, and lived with the material comfort that made other hardships seem manageable. But by 2015, Laila was aware that Tariq maintained affairs. She had discovered evidence accidentally, text messages that were deleted but not thoroughly enough, credit card charges for hotel rooms and jewelry that she never received, extended business trips that seemed to have minimal actual business content. Her initial response had been quiet confrontation followed by Tariq's promises to be more discreet, a resolution that essentially acknowledged his infidelity would continue but should be managed more carefully to avoid embarrassing her publicly. The cultural context made Laila's position complicated. Divorce was possible but devastating. She would lose custody of her children. UAE family law heavily favored fathers. Her social position would collapse. Divorced women were stigmatized regardless of circumstances. And her financial security would depend on negotiated settlements rather than equitable division of marital assets. She had watched friends navigate divorces that left them socially isolated and financially dependent on families who viewed their failed marriages as personal shame. So Laila had adapted, focusing on her children and social obligations while tolerating Tariq's affairs as long as they remained discreet. But his relationship with Yasmin represented something different. It had lasted nearly 4 years, far longer than his typical affairs. He was emotionally invested in ways that threatened Laila's position more fundamentally than brief sexual encounters. And most dangerously, Yasmin's social media presence meant the affair existed in semi-public space where anyone paying attention could piece together the connection between Tariq and the influencer who frequently visited Dubai and whose lifestyle clearly exceeded what her follower count could legitimately fund. Laila's decision to gather evidence rather than immediately confront Tariq or pursue divorce reflected her strategic intelligence and her understanding that information was power. Beginning in July 2022, she began systematically documenting the affair through methods that utilized her computer science background and her access to financial accounts and devices. Financial tracking. As a joint account holder, Laila had access to credit card statements showing hotels, gifts, cash withdrawals, and international transfers. She created spreadsheets documenting every suspicious transaction, building a comprehensive financial trail that revealed not just infidelity, but the monetary value Tariq was placing on his arrangement with Yasmin. Digital forensics. Laila installed monitoring software on Tariq's laptop and phone, not through hacking but through simple physical access combined with technical knowledge. The software captured passwords, tracked browsing history, and recorded messages including those sent through supposedly secure apps that Tariq believed were private. Social media analysis. Laila created fake accounts to follow Yasmin's public social media and to access content that Yasmin had restricted to approved followers. She used image metadata to identify when photos were taken, cross-referenced locations with Tariq's travel schedule, and built timelines showing how Yasmin's Dubai visits coincided exactly with periods when Tariq claimed to be working. OnlyFans account access. This was the most technically sophisticated element of Laila's investigation. Using passwords captured through her monitoring software, Laila discovered that Tariq subscribed to Yasmin's OnlyFans account using a credit card linked to his business. Accessing the account required getting past two-factor authentication, which Laila accomplished by briefly accessing Tariq's phone while he slept and adding her own device to his approved list. What Laila found in the OnlyFans account exceeded even her expectations. Beyond the explicit content that Yasmin provided to all subscribers, there were private messages revealing the transactional nature of their relationship. Messages like, "Transfer confirmed. Baby. $5,000 for this week's visit. Can't wait to see you face-blowing a kiss. Your wife really doesn't know you pay me $8,000 per month for custom content? That's hilarious face with tears of joy. Just posted new content for your eyes only. Worth every dirham you spend on me, kiss mark." Most damning were voice messages where Yasmin discussed Laila explicitly. "Does your boring wife know how much you spend on me? Maybe I should message her and tell her what you really like in bed." These messages revealed not just infidelity but contempt. Not just an affair but mockery of Laila that transformed hurt into rage that demanded response beyond traditional confrontation. Laila spent 6 months gathering evidence, organizing documentation, and planning revenge that would destroy both Tariq and Yasmin with maximum public humiliation while protecting her own position. She consulted with divorce attorneys, presented as hypothetical inquiries, confirmed her evidence would be devastating in family court, and most importantly, recognized that public exposure would be more destructive than legal proceedings, especially for Yasmin, whose entire career depended on maintaining an aspirational image that couldn't survive exposure as essentially a high-end escort. On January 7, 2023, Laila executed her plan with precision. She accessed Yasmin's OnlyFans account from her own device, downloaded all messages and custom content involving Tariq, and then systematically shared the most damaging evidence across multiple platforms. Twitter, WhatsApp groups focused on Filipino communities in Dubai and Manila, gossip forums, and anonymous messages to Filipino influencers who she knew would amplify the scandal. The content she released was carefully selected to maximize damage. Screenshots showing explicit financial transactions for sexual content, messages revealing Yasmin's contempt for Laila, custom videos that made clear the relationship was transactional, and most devastatingly, voice notes where Yasmin laughed about scamming your Sheikh husband while his stupid wife stays home with the kids. The exposure was nuclear. Within 6 hours, the scandal had spread across Filipino social media, been picked up by gossip websites, and generated thousands of comments ranging from slut-shaming to condemnation of Tariq's exploitation. Yasmin's Instagram account was flooded with comments calling her a prostitute, a homewrecker, and worse. Her follower count began dropping as brands and followers distanced themselves from the scandal. Laila had achieved her objective: complete destruction of the affair and both parties' reputations while maintaining her own position as the wronged wife worthy of sympathy. But she had also set in motion a cascade of events she hadn't fully anticipated. Events that would end with Yasmin dead and Laila facing questions about whether her revenge had been justified or whether she bore some responsibility for triggering the violence that followed. The morning of January 8, 2023, began with Yasmin Cruz waking to a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications appeared faster than she could read them. Instagram comments, DM requests, WhatsApp messages from friends and family, missed calls from her parents, her brother, former classmates she hadn't spoken to in years. Her first assumption was that something had gone viral. Maybe one of her posts had been shared by a major account, bringing the surge of attention that influencers constantly sought. Then she started actually reading the messages. "You're disgusting. Selling yourself to married men. Your parents must be so ashamed. Prostitute hiding behind influencer brand. How much does the Sheikh pay you to fuck him?" The screenshots began appearing, her private OnlyFans messages with Tariq, showing not just their affair but the financial transactions that revealed its transactional nature. The voice notes where she had laughed about his wife, made jokes about how much money he spent on her, described sexual acts in graphic detail that made clear this wasn't romance but business. Yasmin's first response was panic followed by desperate attempts at damage control. She deleted her OnlyFans account immediately, but the content was already downloaded and spreading. She privated her Instagram account, but screenshots of her lifestyle posts were being shared with captions like, "This is what prostitution looks like in 2023. Instagram aesthetic funded by selling your body to married men." Her parents called within an hour. Her mother Teresa was crying so hard she could barely speak. Her father Ramon's voice was cold with rage and shame. "Is it true? Did you really do this? Do you understand what you've done to our family's reputation? Your brother's teachers are asking questions. Our neighbors know. Everyone knows my daughter is a prostitute." Yasmin tried to explain that it wasn't prostitution, that she had genuinely cared for Tariq, that the financial support was compensation for her time and companionship, not just sex. But every explanation sounded like rationalization even to her own ears. The distinction between high-end escort and sugar baby and influencer monetizing relationships felt clear in her mind, but evaporated when confronted with evidence that showed her laughing about payments for sex and custom pornographic content. Filipino social media was particularly vicious. The culture's combination of Catholic conservatism and overseas worker shame created toxic commentary. Yasmin was ruining the reputation of Filipino women abroad. She was proof that influencer culture was corrupting traditional values. She was a disgrace to her family and nation. Death threats began arriving by 10 a.m. You should kill yourself before someone does it for you. Come back to Manila and see what happens to whores like you. Brand partnerships evaporated within hours. Companies that had paid Yasmin for sponsored posts rushed to delete previous collaborations and issued statements distancing themselves from her. Her management agency terminated their contract via email with no explanation beyond recent events make continued partnership untenable. Her influencer income, already primarily dependent on her arrangement with Tariq and OnlyFans rather than legitimate partnerships, completely collapsed. By afternoon, Yasmin was in crisis. Her career was destroyed, her family relationships were devastated, her reputation was unsalvageable and most immediately concerning. She was in Dubai on a tourist visa with no income, no return ticket purchased, and growing certainty that returning to Manila would mean facing family shame, community judgment, and potential violence from people who viewed her as representing everything wrong with modern Filipino women. Her attempts to contact Tariq went unanswered for 12 hours before he finally responded at 9 p.m. with a brief WhatsApp message. "This is over. Do not contact me again. I will transfer money for your flight home and compensation for the situation. After that, we have no further connection." The transfer arrived within an hour, 50,000 dirhams, roughly $13,600, simultaneously substantial and insulting. It was significantly more than Yasmin had in savings but far less than what she believed she was owed for 4 years of companionship and for the public humiliation she was enduring. More importantly, it was clearly severance payment designed to close their relationship with finality, and by her silence about any details she hadn't already been exposed. For most people in Yasmin's position, accepting the money and disappearing would have been the rational choice. Return to the Philippines, rebuild quietly away from social media, accept that her influencer career was over and her reputation destroyed. But Yasmin had spent 4 years building a lifestyle she couldn't return from, had accumulated debts to maintain appearances that exceeded the severance payment, and most importantly, had cultivated a sense of entitlement that made accepting defeat feel impossible. Most critically, Yasmin had insurance that she believed gave her leverage, content she had deliberately saved and never shared with anyone. Videos of her and Tariq together, recordings of their conversations about his business and family, and most dangerous, explicit content that showed his face clearly, and that would be far more damaging to him than anything Laila had already released. On January 10, 2023, 48 hours after her life had imploded, Yasmin sent Tariq a message that would seal her fate. "The 50K isn't enough for what you've put me through. I have content your wife didn't find. Videos, recordings, messages that will destroy what's left of your reputation and your business. Transfer 500,000 dirhams, $136,000, or I release everything and give interviews to every media outlet that wants the full story of how Dubai's elite men exploit Filipino women." Blackmail seemed like her only remaining power move, the final card she could play to extract compensation for her destroyed life. What she didn't understand was that blackmailing a wealthy, connected man who was already facing humiliation and potential divorce was not a power move. It was a death sentence disguised as negotiation. Sheikh Tariq's response to Yasmin's blackmail threat was initially dismissive. His first reply, sent at 11:37 p.m. on January 10th, was brief and threatening. "You have nothing that can hurt me worse than what's already public. If you continue threatening me, I will have you arrested for extortion and deported. Accept the money I gave you and disappear." But Yasmin's response included a 30-second video that changed his calculation entirely. The video showed Tariq in bed with Yasmin, his face clearly visible, engaged in explicit sexual activity while describing details of a business deal he was negotiating. Details that were confidential and that, if made public, would violate NDAs and potentially expose him to legal liability beyond just social embarrassment. More damaging was a 5-minute audio recording where Tariq, apparently drunk or high, had detailed his family's business dealings, including specific properties purchased through shell companies to avoid taxes, payments to government officials to expedite permits, and his own affairs with multiple women, including rough descriptions that could be interpreted as admission of sexual misconduct or worse. This content was legitimately dangerous in ways that the OnlyFans messages hadn't been. While the affair and payments were embarrassing, they weren't illegal. But tax evasion, bribery of government officials, and statements that could be construed as admission of sexual assault were criminal matters that could trigger investigations, prosecute penalties, and family business consequences that would affect not just Tariq but his entire extended family. Tariq's response shifted from dismissive to calculating. On January 11th, he agreed to meet Yasmin in person to negotiate a final settlement and discuss how to ensure the content would never be released. He suggested meeting at the Business Bay apartment where they had conducted their affair, private, familiar, and most importantly to Tariq's dark intentions, a location where he had complete control and no surveillance. Yasmin's decision to attend this meeting alone and without telling anyone her location would prove fatal. She was desperate, isolated in Dubai with nowhere else to turn, and genuinely believed that Tariq might negotiate a higher payment rather than risk the content being released. She failed to recognize that she was dealing with someone whose entire life had been characterized by using wealth and power to eliminate problems, and who viewed her not as a human being to negotiate with but as a threat that required permanent elimination. The meeting occurred on January 12, 2023. At 3 p.m. security footage from the apartment building showed Yasmin entering alone at 2:47 p.m., carrying a backpack that presumably contained her laptop or evidence related to her blackmail threats. The footage showed Tariq entering at 2:55 p.m., but critically, it also showed two other men entering at 3:10 p.m., men that subsequent investigation would identify as Rashid and Ahmed, Pakistani nationals who worked for one of Tariq's construction companies in positions that were vaguely described as security consultants. What happened in that apartment over the next 90 minutes would be reconstructed through forensic evidence, witness testimony from building staff, and eventually through partial confessions from Rashid after his arrest. The basic timeline: Tariq initially attempted to negotiate with Yasmin, offering to increase his payment to 200,000 dirhams if she provided all copies of the problematic content, and signed a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement backed by financial penalties if violated. Yasmin apparently demanded 500,000 dirhams and refused to sign any NDA until after payment was received. She had learned enough from her years as an influencer and OnlyFans creator to distrust promises that weren't backed by immediate payment. The negotiation deteriorated into argument, with Yasmin threatening to leave and release the content immediately if Tariq didn't meet her demands. According to Rashid's eventual testimony, Tariq gave a signal at approximately 3:45 p.m., and Rashid and Ahmed restrained Yasmin while Tariq searched her backpack and phone for the content she had threatened to release. The physical struggle was brief. Yasmin was 5 feet 4 inches and perhaps 110 pounds, overpowered quickly by two men whose construction work had given them considerable strength. The plan apparently was to retrieve all content, force Yasmin to provide passwords to her cloud storage accounts, and then deport her with threats that ensured her silence. But during the struggle, according to Rashid, Yasmin struck her head against the edge of a marble counter, initially appearing dazed but conscious, then rapidly deteriorating as internal brain bleeding caused swelling and loss of consciousness. The medical examiner would later determine that Yasmin had sustained a skull fracture and subdural hematoma, injuries consistent with significant impact against a hard surface. Immediate medical care might have saved her life, but Tariq's response to her collapse was not to call ambulance but to panic about the implications of a woman dying in his apartment during what was clearly an assault and potential kidnapping situation. The decision about what to do with Yasmin's unconscious and dying body apparently generated argument among the three men. Rashid would later testify that he advocated for calling an ambulance and claiming the injury was accidental, a fall during consensual encounter that had gone tragically wrong. But Tariq reportedly overruled this suggestion, arguing that any investigation would uncover the blackmail situation, his hiring of Rashid and Ahmed, and evidence that would be difficult to explain away. Instead, Tariq decided to stage the scene to appear that Yasmin had never been there. Security footage shows the three men leaving the apartment at 5:23 p.m., with Rashid and Ahmed carrying what appeared to be rolled carpets, but which forensics would later suggest contained Yasmin's body. They loaded the items into an SUV in the underground parking garage, an area with limited surveillance, and drove to an industrial area near Jebel Ali where construction debris was regularly disposed of. Yasmin's body was placed in a construction dumpster that would be emptied within 24 hours, her belongings scattered to make identification difficult, and the men returned to their respective homes believing they had successfully made the problem disappear. The apartment was cleaned professionally, carpets were replaced, and Tariq prepared to maintain that he had no knowledge of Yasmin's whereabouts after their affair ended. But several mistakes would unravel this plan. First, Yasmin had sent her best friend in Manila a message at 2:30 p.m. on January 12th, meeting Tariq to negotiate. If something happens to me, he's responsible. I'm sending you a file as insurance. Only open it if you don't hear from me by tonight. The file contained copies of all the content she was using for blackmail, along with a detailed document describing her affair with Tariq, the financial arrangements, and her concerns that he might respond violently to her threats. Second, building security footage, while not covering the apartment interior, showed Yasmin entering but never leaving. A discrepancy that became obvious when her friend reported her missing to both Filipino embassy officials and Dubai police after not hearing from her for 24 hours. Third, and most damning, forensic examination of the apartment would find traces of Yasmin's blood despite the professional cleaning. Microscopic evidence on the marble counter edge where she had struck her head, and traces that had seeped into grout that cleaning hadn't fully eliminated. On January 15, 2023, Dubai police arrested Sheikh Tariq Al Maktoum on suspicion of kidnapping and murder. Rashid and Ahmed were arrested the same day, and Yasmin Cruz's body was located in a landfill in Jebel Ali, identified through dental records and DNA, confirming that an affair exposed by a jealous wife had escalated through blackmail into a murder that would destroy everyone involved. The trial of Sheikh Tariq Al Maktoum, Rashid Khan, and Ahmed Hassan began on May 8, 2023, and became one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in UAE history. Prosecutors charged Tariq with conspiracy to commit kidnapping, involuntary manslaughter, arguing the death wasn't premeditated but occurred during commission of another crime, obstruction of justice, and abuse of corpse. Rashid and Ahmed faced similar charges as accomplices plus additional charges related to assault. The prosecution's case was comprehensive. They presented the building security footage showing Yasmin entering but not leaving, forensic evidence proving she had been injured in Tariq's apartment, digital evidence of the blackmail communications, testimony from Yasmin's friend about the insurance file she had received, and most devastatingly, Rashid's confession after he accepted a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Tariq. According to Rashid's testimony, the entire sequence of events had been orchestrated by Tariq. He had hired Rashid and Ahmed specifically to help retrieve property from Yasmin, had instructed them to use whatever force necessary to obtain her devices and passwords, and had made the decision to dispose of her body rather than seek medical care when she was injured. Rashid portrayed himself as an employee following orders from a powerful employer, a characterization that was legally problematic but emotionally understandable given the power dynamics involved. Tariq's defense team, among the most expensive lawyers in Dubai, pursued multiple strategies. They argued that Yasmin's death was accidental, that Tariq had panicked rather than acting with criminal intent, and that the real villain was Yasmin herself who had initiated the criminal extortion that created the circumstances leading to her death. They attempted to introduce evidence of Yasmin's OnlyFans content and her history of transactional relationships to argue that she was a professional extortionist who had targeted wealthy men systematically. This victim-blaming strategy generated significant backlash from Filipino advocacy organizations and human rights groups who argued that regardless of Yasmin's choices or profession, she didn't deserve to die for attempting to negotiate compensation from a man who had exploited her for years. The Filipino Women's Association in Dubai provided testimony about the systematic exploitation of Filipino women by wealthy Gulf men, the impossible choices these women faced between poverty and participating in arrangements that were morally complex, and the violence that often resulted when these arrangements ended. The trial's most controversial aspect was how it exposed the broader influencer escort industry that had operated in legal gray areas. Testimony revealed that dozens if not hundreds of Filipina, Russian, Ukrainian, and other foreign women were working as social media companions for wealthy Gulf men, creating content that promoted luxury lifestyle brands while actually funding those lifestyles through arrangements that everyone knew were transactional but that existed in ambiguous space between legal companionship and prostitution. OnlyFans and similar platforms had enabled monetization of these arrangements in ways that made the transactions more explicit and documented than previous generations' equivalent relationships. The platforms provided financial infrastructure for what amounted to ongoing payment for sexual access and content creation, while the social media aspect provided cover that made participants feel less like sex workers and more like content creators or influencer entrepreneurs. Sheikh Laila was called to testify about how she had discovered the affair and why she had chosen to expose it publicly. Her testimony was carefully calibrated. She expressed sympathy for Yasmin's death, while maintaining that exposing the affair had been an appropriate response to years of humiliation and betrayal. She explicitly stated she had not intended for Yasmin to be harmed, only for the truth about Tariq's behavior to be public. The prosecution attempted to argue that Laila's exposure had created the circumstances that led to the blackmail and subsequent murder, that she bore some moral if not legal responsibility for triggering the cascade of events. But the judge ruled that exposing an affair, even publicly and vengefully, was not criminal and that Laila could not reasonably have anticipated the extreme violence that would follow. The verdict, delivered on July 22, 2023, found all three defendants guilty, but with varying degrees of culpability. Tariq was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice, sentenced to 18 years in prison. Rashid and Ahmed, having cooperated with prosecution, received 10 and 8-year sentences respectively for their roles as accomplices. The judge's statement was notably critical of all parties. While the defendants are criminally responsible for the victim's death, this case reveals a broader moral failing in how our society enables exploitation of vulnerable women through arrangements that exist in legal gray areas, but that clearly create dangerous power imbalances. The victim made choices that many would consider morally questionable, but those choices do not justify violence or death. The defendant's wealth and status do not place him above accountability for his actions. Yasmin Cruz's body was repatriated to the Philippines in August 2023, and buried in Quezon City's public cemetery. Her funeral was attended by her immediate family and a small number of friends, but notably absent were the influencer community and social media followers who had consumed her content for years. The stigma of how she had lived and died made her mourning complicated. Her family grieved genuinely but also struggled with shame about the circumstances. Her OnlyFans and Instagram accounts were permanently deleted, but archives of her content continue circulating as cautionary tales or as exploitative leaked content that continues victimizing her after death. The insurance file she had sent her friend was eventually turned over to investigators and her family, who made the difficult decision not to release it publicly despite potential financial value, deciding that Yasmin's privacy in death mattered more than revenge or money. Tariq's family publicly disowned him. His wife Laila proceeded with divorce that gave her custody of their children and substantial financial settlement, and his business partnerships were dissolved. He serves his sentence in Dubai Central Prison, where reports suggest he maintains his innocence and blames Yasmin for triggering the events through her extortion attempts. Laila emerged from the situation with her reputation relatively intact. Viewed by some as a calculating woman who had weaponized technology for revenge, by others as a wronged wife who had simply exposed truth. She retained custody of her children, maintained her social position, and eventually remarried in 2024 to a businessman whose family background matched hers, but who reportedly understood that Laila's intelligence and capabilities made her a partner rather than an ornament. The broader influencer escort industry continues operating in legal gray areas, with some platforms implementing policies against using their services for sex work and others tacitly accepting it as part of their business model. Filipino women continue migrating to Gulf countries seeking opportunities, some finding legitimate success and others finding exploitation that exists on a spectrum from consensual transactional relationships to coerced prostitution to outright trafficking. Subscribe if these stories matter to you, because Yasmin's death wasn't inevitable. It was the result of a system that creates vulnerability, relationships built on exploitation, and a culture where women's lives are valued less than men's reputations. Share with someone who needs to understand that Instagram perfection often hides desperate reality, that transactional relationships have power dynamics that can turn deadly, and that revenge, even justified, can trigger cascades of violence that destroy everyone involved. Remember Yasmin not as a cautionary tale about bad choices, but as a human being whose desperation was exploited, whose attempts to survive in an unjust system were criminalized, and whose death could have been prevented if anyone, Tariq, Laila, the system, had valued her life as much as they valued protecting reputations and avoiding embarrassment. Justice for Yasmin wasn't complete, but visibility matters. and sometimes visibility is the only justice victims get.